OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox,
That's right, we want to hear from you,
GB News.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Good evening and welcome to this Christmas Day special of Sunday with Michael Portillo. I hope that your stockings are empty, that your stomachs are replete, and that you've enjoyed a peaceful day with your loved ones. Please put your feet up as we bring you a sleigh full of features from throughout the year on this Christmas episode. I'll be revisiting some of my most enjoyable encounters from the last 12 months. We'll meet the father and son duo who are bringing Shakespeare's words and methods back to life. I'll exercise my skills and palate, making and eating honey, cheese and gelato. I also ventured out into the country at large, exploring Britain's motoring legacy and naval history. And we'll hear from Julian Lloyd-Webber, who spent the year interviewing a series of talented musicians. So if you want to ride with me aboard an SAS Land Rover, taste pistachios from the slopes of Etna, or hear what makes a Stradivarius violin sound so special, we'll have it all after the latest news headlines.
Good evening, I'm Ray Addison in the GB Newsroom. Our top stories. The King has thanked the nation's volunteers in his Christmas address, describing them as a selfless army. His Majesty said that they are the essential backbone of our society. He thanked the hundreds of volunteers who attended his coronation in Westminster Abbey earlier on this year and said that their presence is a call to all of us to love and care for all.
On this Christmas Day, my heart and my thanks go to all who are serving one another, all who are caring for our common home, and all who see and seek the good of others, not least the friend we do not yet know. In this way, we bring out the best in ourselves.
Pope Francis has described the children caught up in conflicts across the globe as the little Jesuses of today, as he condemned the ongoing war in Gaza. Delivering his annual Christmas Day address from St. Peter's balcony in the Vatican, he described the attack on Israel by Hamas in October as abominable. But he also said that ongoing strikes on Gaza by Israel were reaping an appalling harvest of innocent people. The Pope's message comes after one of the deadliest nights of violence in Gaza, with at least 100 people killed by airstrikes. Israel's army says that it's investigating one attack after claims from the Hamas-backed health ministry that many of those killed were women and children. The Palestinian Red Crescent says that bombings of major roads is also complicating efforts to help critically wounded people. Fire crews were called to the office of a Conservative MP last night after a suspected arson attack. Police are investigating after Mike Freer's office in North London was partially damaged by the blaze. Mr Freer told GB News that the response from emergency services was excellent and luckily no one was in the building at the time. A 16-year-old boy has been arrested on suspicion of murder after a woman was stabbed in South London. Officers were called to a home in Bermondsey just after 10 o'clock on Christmas Eve. They treated a 22-year-old for stab wounds, but she died at the scene. GB News understands that the boy was known to the victim. He remains in custody. And thousands of people across the country made the most of today's unseasonably mild weather by taking a festive dip. Swimmers in Birmingham braved the waters in hats and costumes at Sutton Park's Black Root Pool, and members of the Serpentine Swimming Club took part in the annual Peter Pan Cup in Hyde Park. The race has been held every year since 1864. Freezing. This is GB News across the UK on TV, in your car, on digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying, play GB News. Now let's get straight back to Michael Portillo.
Welcome back. At the beginning of all my shows, I like to look back on the week's events and dissect the big headlines from a range of perspectives. This year, much of that analysis focused on the performance of the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak. Here's a taste of what my panellists had to say. Luke, what's happening to the ratings for the Prime Minister during all this period?
Well, the big hope when Rishi Sunak came in was that his higher personal ratings would pull the Tories out of the mess they were in after Boris left and after Liz Truss. So it was this hope that they would converge upwards. Unfortunately for the PM, the opposite has happened. It has converged downwards. And if you look at the polls now, Rishi Sunak is about as unpopular as the Conservative Party. So he has taken a real personal hit. And what's interesting is that that seems to have accelerated during the autumn. So I think part of that has clearly been the debate about migration, but also the slightly strange HS2 party conference, some of the net zero staff, but then doing seemingly incongruous things like bringing David Cameron back. Now, each of those choices he's made, you could possibly justify on its own merits, but they don't sit together as a coherent political narrative. And the public sort of go, I don't really get it. What is this man for? We know he's very rich. We quite like the fact that he did furlough and saved our jobs when he showed up. But since he's become PM, we don't really get it or understand it.
Dennis, you've been scrunching your face. How do I interpret this scrunched face?
No, very simply, I don't think small boats are really that, or Rwanda's irrelevant. We can send a plane load or two. I remember David Blunkett phoning me up and screaming at me, Dennis, I've got 130 illegal Brazilians on an airplane at Bryce Norton. I want to ship them out and show how tough we are on illegal immigration. But the Brazilians won't let me land my plane. And so I phoned up the Brazilian Foreign Minister's mate and said, por favor, or please. He said, no, Dennis, we're not having your guy humiliating our citizens. They went on a tourist visa. Yeah, maybe they kind of stretched it a little bit in cafes and so on, and restaurants. They can come back one by one. We're not denying Britain's right to expel them, but we're not having this giant publicity stunt to humiliate the people of Brazil. Well, David was on holiday in Mallorca, so I said, I think you better just enjoy the holiday, David. You're not going to get much out of it.
I think there's an issue here, which is that, you said, is this country better today than it was 13 years ago? It's been getting steadily worse for decades. The Conservative Party has done nothing good for the economy, for people's quality of living, for people's aspirations, jobs, or whatever else. The Labour Party hasn't either in the period of time in which it was government. There's no suggestion that when it would get...
13
Listen,
years.
if you'd let me
We have a nice polite programme here.
Yeah, but let me, as the only lady on the panel, finish the sentence, please.
Oh.
Which is that I think in relation to if gender is relevant, questions about stuff that I care about, women's rights, issues around childcare, family, all the rest of it, both parties very lacking. So from your average Joe and Jane sat at home, who's probably not cheering on the appointment of Cameron, probably not that excited, as we can tell from recent election wins by Labour, by the prospect of a Labour Party. The sort of mood is that there's going to be potentially low turnout in the next general election, and most people sort of doing that with their vote, like having to pick the worst out of a bad bunch. That's a depressing prospect for me.
John, what's your comment on the AI summit? Because I know you've got something disobliging to say.
I thought it was very funny to see Rishi Sunak abjectly interviewing Elon Musk. But it's appropriate because Elon Musk has done for the share price of Twitter what the Tories have done for the UK economy.
That's a very good line. I have a feeling John has been rehearsing that one. Of course, sometimes a political story can transcend mere newspaper gossip. And that was the case when I interviewed two members of the LGBT community who are also veterans of the armed forces, from a time when it was illegal to be gay in the military. They were campaigning for an apology from the government for the treatment of LGBT veterans, an apology that was eventually made by the Prime Minister. Afterwards, I invited them back on the show, where I made my own apology.
I was one of the lucky ones, in a sense, insofar as I decided to voluntarily resign early. There were reasons for that. I'd been serving for 20 years at that time as a Royal Navy executive branch officer, and I had a partner who I'd first met, my very first partner, in '88, having joined in '72, and he was HIV positive. At the time, I had a very responsible job at the Faslane nuclear submarine base, and I later went on back down to Portsmouth, my home city, to head up the tertiary stage of junior officers training, and where we ran the Officer Watch course. And this was a very difficult life. I fell in love with this individual. I found out that he was HIV positive. We knew at that time that meant that one day he would die. And somewhere over the horizon lurked this iceberg. And we were intent on having as good a life as possible together. But I had to do it in a Jekyll and Hyde existence.
Caroline, let's hear a part of your story. You joined the Royal Air Force as a man. What was the legal position in the armed forces about changing your sex in those days?
Yeah, I'm a transgender woman. When I joined, I was aware of that. So in those days, the society, let alone the military, didn't understand the difference between gender identity and sexual orientation. So I would have been considered as a gay man, and I would have been subject to the same dismissal consequences as gay service people. So it was known as a gay ban because that was the terminology that was in use at the time. Nowadays, it would have been known as an LGBT plus ban. It really didn't discriminate against identity or orientation.
Well, I was Defence Secretary between 95 and 97. And of course, all the advice I received from the armed forces was that it was impossible to think of changing this, that for matters of discipline, it was absolutely necessary, that there should be no doubt. So you couldn't have the idea that two servicemen were in love with each other or something like that. This would make them unreliable, discipline would be impossible, etc., etc., etc.
The ban on LGBT people serving in our military until the year 2000 was an appalling failure of the British state, decades behind the law of this land. As today's report makes clear, in that period, many endured the most horrific sexual abuse and violence, homophobic bullying and harassment, all while bravely serving this country. Today, on behalf of the British state, I apologise.
Caroline, may I ask you, Was it an emotional moment when you heard about the report and heard the apology? And I ask you also, does it have any practical effect upon you in terms of medals or compensation or anything like that?
Michael, great to see you again. Yes, it does. As Patrick said, we were up in Strangers Gallery and with some veterans who had been impacted by the ban, and the emotions in that gallery were incredible. There was tears, there was happiness, there was pride. There was pride in the fact that their service had now been recognised, and they were serving personnel. They were our front line of defence, and we treated them so badly. And now the nation has said we did that, and that we're proud of them. So there's mixed emotions, of course, because an apology is absolutely brilliant. It's a long time coming. However, it doesn't fix what happened to those individuals. And that's what the reparations are all about. And as Patrick said, there's 49 of them, plus a few more in suggestions from Lord Efferton. And those will include the medals and the likes of the pardons and the extension of pardons. And those are already up and available on the Ministry of Defence website. But there's a lot of the more complex reparations that we'll need a bit more time to look at, and that's why the government has set those aside until they come back after summer recess. And that, of course, includes compensation.
Patrick listed Todd and Caroline Page. May I say that if the Prime Minister has apologised for what happened many years ago, I would like to add my apology since I was Secretary of State for Defence between 1995 and 1997. Thanks for coming on to both of you. 2023 marks 400 years since Shakespeare's first folio was published, the work that for the first time gathered the great bard's plays in a single volume. Without it, works such as Macbeth, Julius Caesar and The Tempest might have been lost forever. In July, I had the chance to speak to the father and son duo, Ben and David Crystal, the former a scholar, the latter a Shakespearean actor. They introduced me to the sound of Shakespeare's words as they would actually have been spoken at the time. Have a listen.
When to the sessions of sweet, silent thought I summon up remembrance of things past, I sigh the lack of many a thing I sought, and with old woes new wail my dear time's waste.
Now, this is a sonnet, Michael, so every couplet has got to rhyme exactly, because that's the way sonnets were. So did you notice? Things past, my dear time's waste. Come on, Shakespeare, what's going on? I mean, are you really a bad poet? No, of course you're not. What's happened is that the pronunciation has shifted. So this is
Are you sure about that?
I can tell you why in just a sec.
Okay,
but
fine.
let's hear it first of all in OP, and then you'll get the sense of it. When to the sessions of sweet, silent thought I summon up remembrance of things past, I sigh the lack of many a thing I sought, and with old woes new wail my dear time's waste. So past and wast then rhyme perfectly. Now, everybody says, how do you know? How do you know? And there are three ways in which you know. First of all, you look at all those rhymes in Shakespeare that don't work in modern English, and you think...
But they work on the page. You can see the relation between the words on the page.
Some do, some don't. But you know, that's the first piece of evidence.
And you're talking about a time when 80% of people were illiterate as well, so there's eye
They
rhyme.
weren't seeing it on the page.
Yeah, they wouldn't have seen it anyway. And then the second kind of evidence is the spellings. You know, spelling wasn't standard like it is today, and often the spellings represent the pronunciation. So that's another kind of evidence. And then the third and the most important kind of evidence is the fact that people wrote books at the end of the 16th and early 17th century saying how words were to be pronounced. So you put all of that together and you get that kind of very interesting accent. I mean, you'll notice some of the features of it. The R is pronounced after a vowel, for instance. You know, it's heart, not heart. Words like old woes, not old woes. You know, it's old woes. And then dear, for example, and times, that I sound that's in there. And these are the features that, not just me, I mean, I'm standing on the shoulders of people who have been studying this kind of thing for over 100 years.
Ben and David Crystal there. Stay with us, as we'll have more of our best bits from throughout the year after a short break. And I'll be sampling some of this country's tastiest foods as I revisit my Taste of Britain series.
Hello there, I'm Greg Dewhurst and welcome to your latest GB News weather. We've had quite a wet Christmas day, but the good news is that rain is clearing, and for Boxing Day it'll be much drier and brighter as this brief ridge of high pressure starts to build in. However, it doesn't last long before further weather systems move in as we head into Wednesday. So this evening time, rain still clearing the far southeast, some showery rain for Northern Ireland, southern Scotland, northern England for a time, but for the vast majority overnight it's dry with clear spells. Some wintry showers continue across northern parts of Scotland, some icy stretches here. Elsewhere, temperatures lower than they have been of late, but still fairly mild across southern counties of England and Wales. So it means a bright start to Boxing Day, plenty of sunny spells, a chilly start, icy stretches slowly melting away across parts of Scotland, and then for most a dry, bright day, plenty of hazy sunshine though, the cloud thickening from the southwest through into the afternoon, outbreaks of rain developing here. A fresher day for everyone, temperatures nearer to average 4 to 7 Celsius, mild air returning across the southwest. Then it's very unsettled on Wednesday. Outbreaks of heavy rain, strong winds push across the country, snow across the Scottish hills too, and temperatures remain well above average for the time of year. Some of that rain will be heavy at times, and it stays unsettled through Thursday and Friday. Further showery rain in places and temperatures above average.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Wake up to the headlines with headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks, the admission's free.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I. So you want higher taxes? Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you. Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months. That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. One of the many perks of this job is sampling delicious foods from across the United Kingdom through my Taste of Britain series. In March, I travelled to the Essex countryside to try some British wild honey with honey sommelier Sarah Wyndham-Lewis and her husband Dale Gibson. The word sommelier is important because, as I learned, the place of origin of a jar of honey is as important as a vineyard to a bottle of wine. Here we are at the end of March. I thought the bees would be quite docile at this time of year, but they're buzzing about.
Yeah, well, the weather is good. We've got sunshine, we've got 14 degrees of temperature, and so there's pollen to be had.
So, Dale, what are the duties of the beekeeper? What does the beekeeper have to do to help the bees?
Well, I think our view about beekeeping is you want to have maximum knowledge and minimum intervention. So really the bees have been on Earth for 88 million years and they know how to be bees. So I don't want to try and tell them how to do that. I just want to help them on their way through becoming better bees.
Now, would it be terribly intrusive if we looked inside a hive?
Not at all. Always just remember that what we're doing when we open up a hive is we're changing their environment from dark to light, and we're dropping the temperature by probably about 15 degrees. Everyone are very concerned about bees, but here I'm putting my hand right in the middle of our bees, and there isn't any consternation amongst them at all. They're really not that disturbed at all to see us. You can see they've still got plenty of honey left here from winter. Still lots to get them going into the spring.
Did it take you long to learn all these techniques, Dale?
I'm still learning. I mean, it's only been 17 years after all. So here we have a nice frame of bees. You've got pollen there, you've got bee eggs. Like chess pieces, they can only do certain things and make certain moves, but the combination of those moves, like chess, is pretty infinite, which makes beekeeping quite interesting as you try to piece together which way the bees are heading and what they're up to. But that's just the queen bee that was responsible for all of these eggs. All of these bees are her daughters.
All of them?
All of them.
That's quite a rate of reproduction, isn't it?
Yes. You need to get this bee colony up to about 70,000. So if you put your push my fingers out of the way. There you go. So there you are, Michael. Big smile. Now that you're a beekeeper, you've made a great progress here.
It is quite a feeling, this, because we're all trained, we're all conditioned, aren't we, to be frightened of bees and wasps. And here I am holding, what, a couple of thousand, I imagine?
Yep, that's about right.
Sarah Wyndham-Lewis and Dale Gibson from Bermondsey Street Bees there. As that cold spring weather turned to summer, I tried my hand at making cooling gelato at a parlour in North London with Michelina Caliendo-Sear, whose family has been making gelato there for a century and a half. And she explained to me the crucial distinctions between gelato and ice cream. Michelina, il momento della verità, the moment of truth. So it's been in there, it's whipped around, it's nice and cold, ready to go?
It is ready to go and extract.
Now, I bet you have a knack to this, so I'm going to leave it to you. You show me what you do.
We do, because we have to make sure that it looks visually appealing to the public as it comes out. So we gently place it into the pan, and we don't want to compress any of the air out. We want it to have a nice height to it so that it sits like pillows of joy.
Pillows of joy. I bring you tidings of pillows of joy.
Thank you very much, Michael. Well done.
Fiona.
Hello, Michael. How are you?
It's great to see you. So you are the front of house.
I am, indeed.
My goodness, what a display of gelato you have there. Just whip me through these flavours.
So we tend to separate our cabinet out. On the left-hand side here, we have our sorbet selection. Anything with a green handle basically is dairy-free. We do a huge amount of it in the UK. We then move into our sort of what we call crowd pleasers, our chocolates, Amarena cherry, fior di latte, etc. And then to the right, we can tend to keep our nuts. and I believe you were just making some pistachio, Bronte pistachio with Michelina.
I certainly was. So if these are the crowd pleasers, are these the sophisticates?
I would say so, yes. I mean, we've got some classics in there. For me, a classic combination would be a chocolate, a pistachio and hazelnut, stracciatella and pistachio. They would be, most of the Italians will come in and tend to eat that. Amarena cherry, hugely popular as well. And as always, cafe latte.
You like interacting with the public?
I love it, and I think it helps, perhaps maybe that I'm Northern Irish, that we do like to talk to people.
So I believe in Northern Ireland you speak of going for a poke.
Yes.
When you're going for an ice cream beam. So I hope at no risk of being misunderstood, could I have a poke of pistachio, please?
You can, un poco.
Un poco, yes, a poke, of course.
Yes, that's where I think it comes from. However, I would stand to be corrected. So, pistachio, yes?
Pistachio.
Okay. So what we're doing here is massaging the product so that it actually warms up a little.
Uh-huh.
And it gives the client a much better mouthful. It looks much better. There you go.
Oh, do you know, there's so much more in the way you presented that than I could ever have imagined. Well, now I believe this is these wonderful pistachios, Bronte pistachios.
In order to be classified as Bronte, it has to be, it's a bit like a Champagne region, but for pistachios. It has to be grown basically on the foothills of Mount Etna in that specific region. So it's a much smaller, much sweeter nut, and I think certainly you can taste the quality difference from normal pistachio.
That is one of the great ices that I have ever licked, and I am transported to the slopes of Mount Etna. Ooh, volcanic taste.
Exactly, the richness of the soil coming through.
It's a hard life. After the break, we'll take a look at some of the wonderful music films recorded by Julian Lloyd Webber, including an exploration of what makes one string instrument worth a few £1,000s, while another might be worth several million. Stay with us.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks, the admission's free.
Wake up to the headlines with headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox,
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News is Britain's news channel, and now you can support it. All you have to do is scan that QR code that's up on your screen right now, or you can go to gbnews.com/support and become a GB News member. You'll have fantastic benefits. We're also going to organise special events where you as GB News members can meet the presenters, the on-screen faces. Scan the QR code or go to gbnews.com/support. Thank you so much.
Welcome back. Julian Lloyd-Webber played the cello for half a century and would be the first to say that a performance is a double act between player and instrument. Just as musicians train to perfect their technical ability, the wooden strings must yield to their instructions in order to convey the emotion of the performance. With that in mind, Julian visited the world-renowned violin maker Florian Lehnert back in July to find out why 2 instruments that might appear to the layperson much the same can vary in price from perhaps a few £1,000s to tens of millions.
So we've been talking millions here, Florian. So what have we got now? This is the cheaper end of the market?
Yeah, it's the cheaper end of the market. Anything that starts sounding quite well is from around £10,000 onwards. And here we have 2 instruments in that range. And this is a Matthew Hardy. It's an English violin made around 1810. It's in lovely condition, sounds decent. Here we have a modern Italian violin, cello from Cremona, also decent, beautiful sound. But you can ask the players later what they feel, how inspiring that might be and what is lacking.
Okay, what's your reaction to that?
It lost the deepness.
Yes.
And also
the buzz.
Yeah.
Yeah, and to me it doesn't even have much projection.
Yeah, it's just like a kind of on the surface.
I love the warmth in the violin. It has a slightly slower response.
To me, that's not a bad sound. It's strong. It's quite powerful, but a bit thin.
It has a little bit of a matchness in the sound, but I think it has a lot of warmth.
Although it's not as good as the other one, but still it's not bad. It's reasonable for that price. It's definitely worth it.
Now, this is the grand finale here. We got 2 wonderful instruments, and I must say, extremely expensive instruments. So tell us about the cello.
Yeah, I mean, this is Matteo Goffrilla. So Goffrilla is one of those cello makers of cellos for cellists. That is a dream instrument. And so Goffrilla is a Venetian cello maker, and the Venetian cello makers like Montagnana and Goffrilla in particular are very bass, strong instruments. They're built in a certain way that they have width and depth in sound and brilliance at the top. Yes. Very, very useful, and still not as expensive as a Stradivari.
Oh, now let's get some figures here. You say much cheaper. How much is this?
Put it in percentages. It's maybe a quarter of the Stradivari cello.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we're talking several millions here, and I haven't heard this yet. I'm looking forward to this.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that is certainly a wonderful sound.
You have all that overtone range. You discover in which place between the fingerboard and the bridge you keep the bow, and which speed, at which pressure, and that gives different colors, but also dynamic range.
And with a lesser instrument, it doesn't matter what you do.
It's nearly the same.
Yeah. So Ellie, you now have a Stradivarius in your hands. Tell us about this one.
It's of the late period, Stradivari, in really great condition.
So this would be 1730s, 1720s?
Yeah, it's in the 1730s. It's a violin that's still made by the 92-year-old Stradivari. Incredible. And you can still see his handwriting in it. It's so strong and powerful. You can virtually feel it was built by a virtuoso who nearly built it blindly. He had such security and certainty in expression.
What are you going to play us?
I'll play a little bit of the Waxman's Carmen Fantasy.
Okay. To my ears, that is different class.
Wonderful. Throughout this year, Julian has interviewed a string of talented musicians, many of whom had to overcome challenges to forge careers in classical music, but none more so than the pianist that Julian spoke to just a few weeks ago. Nicholas McCarthy was born without a right hand, and yet has forged a successful career as a concert pianist and pioneer of the lesser-known left-hand piano repertoire. Julian caught up with him at the Amadeus Music Hall in Maida Vale. Nicholas McCarthy there performing for Julian Lloyd Webber. In just a moment, I'll look back at some of the great British history that we've explored here on GB News, from Royal Navy ships to the late Queen's favourite vehicle, the Land Rover.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you. Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months. That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests, and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Country Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 till 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. The HMS Gloucester was a 17th century warship that sank off the east coast of England in 1682. It was carrying James Stuart, the future King of England and Scotland, who barely escaped with his life. 2 brothers from Norfolk spent years searching for the wreck, finally discovering it in 2007. Back in February, I took a trip to the Norfolk coast to investigate. The wreck lies out there, miles off the Norfolk coast. Its location, a closely guarded secret. 2 divers, brothers Lincoln and Julian Barnwell, and their colleague James Little, were determined to find the Gloucester. And at last, in 2007, they succeeded. Gentlemen, how did you first have the idea of searching for the Gloucester?
One night I was just flicking through my book of shipwrecks and thought, let's go right back into the oldest date I could find. 1682 Gloucester, cannon on board, and the Duke of York. And I just couldn't believe that was on our patch where we were diving anyway. So that night I rang up my brother and I said, "Are you up for it?" And he said yes, and it began there.
How did you know where to look? What were the clues?
The secret is to find out where it isn't.
Well, that's a good point, yes.
You actually sort of plug the gaps like that, and with a magnometer, you tow it behind your boat at a certain speed, and it was just a matter of sticking at it and keeping our fingers crossed.
Tell me about that moment when you first saw the wreck.
You're going down the shot line, attached to the seabed, and then I just saw these lovely shadows on the seabed, which alerts you to wreckage, and they were sort of dotted around the seabed, so it wasn't a steel wreck standing upright. It was very interesting. So another 5 metres, I'm just kneeling there on the seabed, surrounded by these beautiful, massive cannons.
The wreck is probably split down the keel, with the stern, where the royal quarters would have been, lodged into the sand. Many priceless objects have been brought to the surface and feature in the exhibition The Last Voyage of the Gloucester here at the Castle Museum in Norwich. Professor Claire Jowett is one of the curators.
Amazing to have that royal insignia on the leather pouch. The bell was rescued weighing 20 stone when it first came up, but once conserved, it's now, I think, lost about 8 stone, but it's beautiful. It's got a 1681 date on it, and that was decisive in identifying this as the Gloucester.
2023 marked 3/4 of a century since the Land Rover made its debut at the Amsterdam Motor Show. The British Army first started using it in 1949, and Her late Majesty Queen Elizabeth II was known to be a big fan. It's estimated that she owned at least 30 over the years. To celebrate this most iconic British vehicle, I went to visit a unique collection of Land Rovers in Surrey. Richard, here we are celebrating 75 years of Land Rover, and it looks to me as though this is quite an early model.
It's a very early model. It's a 1949. And apart from being a 1949, it is rare in that it's fitted with a Rolls-Royce 4-cylinder engine. The British Army decided that they'd like to try and have an engine that they had spare parts for, and tried to fit it in 1 or 2 Land Rovers, but in fact it didn't work very well. And we've got the only example that's known of the 30 that were built.
How was the Land Rover devised in the first place?
The Wilkes brothers, who owned the Rover Car Company during the war, made aircraft components. And at the end of the war, they had a wonderful workforce, they had a wonderful building, and they couldn't get enough steel to build motor cars other than for export. And so they said, well, what do we do? How do we get this wonderful company going again? And they bought a Second World War Jeep, and they took it to Anglesey, where they had a holiday house, drew a picture of what they thought the Rover for the land might look like, and make it a bit more useful than a Jeep by having an open back that farmers could use, and that sort of thing. And that is how the Rover for the land started. And they thought, we'll just build these vehicles for a couple of years until we can get back to car production. And then eventually the British Army gave them an order for 1,000 vehicles, and they suddenly thought, well, actually, this Rover for the land might be better than we thought.
Sounds like it was an instant success then, was it?
Oh, yes. They were very, very attractive to farmers in particular. The farmers didn't have a small vehicle that they could take across the fields and work with, and that's why the Land Rover became so popular.
This is a different kettle of fish, obviously a militarised vehicle. What's the story on this one?
This is known as a Pink Panther for the obvious reason that it's painted pink. And the reason that it's painted pink is that the RAF decided that if vehicles were painted this colour on the sand, the silhouette didn't show up. And they told the SAS, and the SAS said, right, in that case, we're going to paint all our vehicles this colour, which is what they did.
It was effective, was it?
Terribly effective. And this particular vehicle is one of a batch of vehicles which was designed to be able to sustain 3 men for 3 weeks with everything that was carried on it.
That is sensational.
It is.
This vehicle must have had some adventures. Can you tell me about them?
we know a lot of adventures which we're not allowed to talk about.
It's been great being here, thank you so much. I need to get back to the railway station. Do you have a vehicle spare at the moment?
Oh, I think we might find something interesting for you, and thank you very much for coming and seeing us.
I've really enjoyed it, thank you. This looks just the ticket. I've certainly enjoyed my visit, thank you so much, and best wishes for the future.
Thank you, it's been a great pleasure.
Railway station, please. Well, that's the end of this special Christmas episode of Sunday with Michael Portillo. I hope that you've had as much fun watching the programme as I've had making it over the last year. I'll be back in January with more arts, culture and good conversation. Please be sure to join me then, but for now, continue to have a very happy Christmas.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Greg Dewhurst and welcome to your latest GB News weather. We've had quite a wet Christmas day, but the good news is that rain is clearing, and for Boxing Day it'll be much drier and brighter as this brief ridge of high pressure starts to build in. However, it doesn't last long before further weather systems move in as we head into Wednesday. So this evening time, rain still clearing the far southeast, some showery rain for Northern Ireland, southern Scotland, northern England for a time, but for the vast majority overnight it's dry with clear spells. Some wintry showers continue across northern parts of Scotland, some icy stretches here. Elsewhere, temperatures lower than they have been of late, but still fairly mild across southern counties of England and Wales. So it means a bright start to Boxing Day, plenty of sunny spells, a chilly start, icy stretches slowly melting away across parts of Scotland, and then for most a dry, bright day, plenty of hazy sunshine though, the cloud thickening from the southwest through into the afternoon, outbreaks of rain developing here. A fresher day for everyone, temperatures nearer to average 4 to 7 Celsius, mild air returning across the southwest. Then it's very unsettled on Wednesday. Outbreaks of heavy rain, strong winds push across the country, snow across the Scottish hills too, and temperatures remain well above average for the time of year. Some of that rain will be heavy at times, and it stays unsettled through Thursday and Friday. Further showery rain in places and temperatures above average.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Have a great Saturday night with me, Leo Kerr.